Rain lashed against the windows of my Millbrook home, a stark contrast to the warmth I'd tried to cultivate inside. I'd spent the afternoon preparing a special dinner for Michael and his fiancée, Madison Walsh. Roast chicken, your favorite. I'd told him on the phone earlier that day, and I'm making that apple pie you loved as a boy. He'd sounded genuinely pleased, which eased the flutter of nerves in my stomach. This was the first time Madison would be visiting my home, and I wanted everything to be perfect. I smoothed down the tablecloth one last time, adjusting the centerpiece of freshly cut hydrangeas from my garden. They should be here any minute, I murmured to myself, glancing at the antique clock on the mantelpiece. It was a gift from my late husband, a constant reminder of happier times. The doorbell chimed, and I rushed to answer it. A welcoming smile plastered on my face. Michael stood on the porch, sheltering Madison from the downpour with a large umbrella. "Mom," Michael greeted, pulling me into a hug. "So glad you could do this." He stepped aside, revealing Madison in a stylish trench coat. "Madison, this is my mom, Hazel. It's lovely to finally meet you," Madison said, her voice polite but cool. She offered a brief handshake, her eyes quickly scanning the entryway. "Charming," she commented, her tone lacking any real warmth. Come in, both of you. You must be soaked." I ushered them inside, taking Michael's coat and gesturing for Madison to place hers on the coat rack. "I have a fire going in the living room. Let's get you warmed up." As we moved into the living room, Madison's gaze lingered on the family photos adorning the walls. "These are lovely," she remarked, stopping at a picture of Michael as a young boy, grinning gap-toothed at the camera. "He's always been such a charmer. He gets it from his father," I said, a pang of sadness hitting me. Madison nodded politely. "Your husband, he passed some time ago." "Yes," I replied softly. 5 years now." "Oh," Madison said, her expression unchanging. "Well, at least you have this lovely house to keep you company." There was a subtle edge to her voice that I couldn't quite decipher. We settled in the living room, the fire crackling merrily in the hearth. I offered them drinks, and Madison requested a sparkling water with lime. "No ice, please," she added. As I prepared their drinks in the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that Madison's politeness masked a thinly veiled disapproval. Dinner was strained. I'd made Michael's favorite roast chicken, the skin crispy and golden brown, just the way he liked it. I'd even managed to find fresh asparagus at the farmer's market that morning, but Madison barely touched her food, picking at it with her fork. "I'm trying to be mindful of my figure for the wedding," she explained, offering a tight smile. "Julian prefers me slim." I tried to keep the conversation flowing, asking about their wedding plans. Madison described the venue, a lavish estate overlooking the Hudson River. "It's absolutely breathtaking," she gushed. "Julian spared no expense." "That's wonderful," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "We're having a string quartet," Madison continued, "and the floral arrangements are going to be imported from Holland. It's going to be exquisite." "It sounds elaborate," I managed, the word feeling inadequate against the tide of Madison's descriptions. "Oh, it is," Madison agreed. "Julian wants everything to be perfect. He has high standards." She glanced at me, her eyes lingering on my simple cotton dress. I felt a blush creep up my neck. After dinner, I brought out the apple pie, still warm from the oven. "This is my specialty," I announced, placing the pie on the table. "I hope you'll try a slice." Madison eyed the pie skeptically. "Is it very sweet?" she asked. "It has just the right amount of sweetness," I assured her. "I use Granny Smith apples, so it's tart as well." Madison took a tiny sliver, barely enough to cover her fork. She tasted it cautiously, then placed her fork back on her plate. "It's interesting," she said, her tone noncommittal. "Julian doesn't really care for desserts. He prefers things less rustic." I felt a sting of disappointment. I'd put so much effort into making the pie, hoping it would bridge the gap between us. But Madison seemed determined to find fault with everything. As they prepared to leave, Madison turned to me. "Thank you for dinner, Hazel," she said, her voice polite but distant. "It was an experience." "You're welcome, dear," I replied, forcing a smile. Michael hugged me goodbye. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered. "It was great." He looked at me with a mixture of apology and helplessness in his eyes. I watched them walk out into the rain, the umbrella shielding them from the downpour. As their car pulled away, I turned back to the empty house, the scent of apple pie lingering in the air, now a bitter reminder of Madison's subtle barbs. A quiet resolve began to settle in my heart. I picked up a small, ornate box from the mantelpiece, a box containing something of great sentimental value, something that could change everything. I opened it, a glimmer of steel catching the firelight. Madison wanted high standards. She would have them. She had underestimated me, and I had a plan. Rain lashed against the windows of my Millbrook home, mirroring the damp chill that had settled in my heart. Madison, now a fixture since the wedding, perched on the edge of my antique sofa, a delicate teacup balanced in her manicured hand. "This china is quaint, Hazel," she'd remarked earlier, her tone a curious mix of politeness and condescension. "Julian's family uses Rosenthal, you know, much more modern." Over the following months, these seemingly innocuous comments became a constant drizzle of disapproval. My home, my life, even my cooking, nothing quite met Madison Walsh's exacting standards. She'd rearrange my carefully placed photographs, sighing about clutter. She'd suggest lighter meals, full of ingredients I'd never even heard of, implying my traditional recipes were heavy. "Michael has such a sensitive stomach," she'd murmur, a delicate hand fluttering over her own flat abdomen. "I'd spent years perfecting my Sunday roasts, tweaking the gravy just so, knowing how much Michael loved them. Now, I found myself serving quinoa salads and steamed vegetables, my son's favorite gravy boat gathering dust in the pantry. One blustery afternoon, she arrived with a stack of interior design magazines. "I thought these might give you some inspiration, Hazel," she said, spreading them across my coffee table, their glossy pages filled with stark minimalist spaces. "Your furniture is a little dated, don't you think? A more contemporary style would really open up the place." I managed a weak smile, my fingers tracing the carved wood of the table, a piece my husband and I had chosen together years ago. "It's comfortable," I replied, the words catching in my throat. She patted my hand, her smile tight. "Of course, darling. But comfort isn't everything, is it? It wasn't just the house. It was me. I felt increasingly invisible, a ghost in my own home. I started second-guessing everything, my voice growing quieter, my presence shrinking. My evenings, once filled with the comforting routines of a life well lived, now revolved round anticipating and accommodating Madison's next visit, her next critique. One particularly cold evening, Michael announced they were going to Paris for Christmas. My heart leaped. I loved Paris, had always dreamed of seeing the Christmas markets. That sounds wonderful, I said, picturing myself strolling along the Seine, sipping hot chocolate beneath twinkling lights. Madison smiled, a gleam in her eye. Oh, we'd love for you to come, Hazel, but we've booked a couple's retreat. It's very intimate. My smile faltered, the image of Paris dissolving like mist. Of course, I managed, the familiar ache of disappointment settling in my chest. Michael squeezed my hand. We'll bring you back a souvenir, Mom. A souvenir. A plastic Eiffel Tower keychain to replace the real experience. The days that followed were a blur of forced cheerfulness and quiet resignation. I decorated the house for Christmas, the festive lights doing little to dispel the growing shadow within me. Madison called, her voice bright and breezy. Michael and I were just discussing our New Year's plans. Hazel, we thought a ski trip to Aspen might be fun. Just the two of us. We need some alone time, to really connect. This time, I didn't even bother feigning enthusiasm. Of course, I said, my voice flat. Have a wonderful time. She paused, a slight hesitation in her voice. We were thinking of using your apartment in the city. Hazel, the one you never use. It's so close to the slopes, and it would be such a shame to let it go to waste. My apartment. My little pied-à-terre in Manhattan, a place I'd kept after my husband's passing, a small piece of my independence. I hadn't thought about it. I stammered, a flicker of something defiance, perhaps igniting in my chest. I might be using it myself over the holidays. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a silence that spoke volumes. Oh, Madison finally said, her voice tight. Well, let me know if you change your mind. It would be so much more convenient for us. That night, as the snow fell softly outside, I sat by the fire, a strange calmness washing over me. The flicker of defiance had grown into a steady flame. I looked at the photographs on the mantelpiece. Pictures of my husband, of Michael as a boy, of happier times. I thought about my life, about the sacrifices I'd made, about the woman I used to be. A slow smile spread across my face. I picked up my phone and dialed a number. Hello, Pierre, I said, my voice regaining its strength. I need a favor. I'm going to need my apartment in the city prepared for a very special New Year's Eve party. Rain lashed against the stained glass windows of the grand ballroom, a dramatic counterpoint to the joyous occasion. My son, Michael, was marrying Madison Walsh, and despite the gnawing unease I'd felt since their engagement, I was determined to be happy for him. This day, in this historic Hudson Valley mansion I'd painstakingly restored over the years, represented the culmination of everything I'd worked for, every sacrifice I'd made as a single mother. Isn't this place a bit much? Madison had remarked earlier, her voice laced with a subtle disdain that pricked at me. I'd simply smiled and said, "It's a special day, darling. We wanted to celebrate in style, but her words, like a persistent draft, chilled the warmth I tried so hard to maintain. The ceremony was beautiful, a blend of tradition and modern touches that reflected their personalities. Watching Michael exchange vows with Madison, I felt a pang of bittersweet nostalgia. He looked so handsome in his tuxedo, a mirror image of his father gone too soon. Tears welled in my eyes, not just for the poignant memory, but for the creeping fear that I was losing my son to a woman who seemed determined to diminish everything I held dear. "You look lovely, Hazel," Michael's aunt, Susan, whispered, squeezing my hand. "Michael is so lucky to have you." Her words were a balm to my wounded spirit. "Thank you, Susan," I replied, managing a genuine smile. "It means a lot." The reception was a whirlwind of music, laughter, and well wishes. I circulated among the guests, trying to ignore the subtle digs Madison continued to deliver. "These canapes are interesting," she'd murmured, wrinkling her nose at the meticulously crafted hors d'oeuvres I'd personally selected. Julian isn't used to so rustic fare. Julian, her perpetually unimpressed fiancé, stood beside her, a silent statue of judgment. I excused myself to the powder room, needing a moment of respite from the constant undercurrent of disapproval. Splashing cool water on my face, I stared at my reflection. The woman staring back looked tired, the joy of the day eclipsed by a growing sense of displacement. Was this what the future held? Being a perpetual outsider in my own son's life, constantly second-guessed and undermined by Madison and her icy fiancé. The thought was a bitter pill to swallow. Returning to the reception, I forced myself to engage in polite conversation, to play the role of the gracious mother of the groom, but the effort felt increasingly hollow. During the father-daughter dance, which Michael shared with me, a moment that should have been filled with pure joy, Madison hovered nearby, her eyes fixed on us with an unnerving intensity. As Michael twirled me across the dance floor, he whispered, "Mom, everything all right? You seem distant." "Just a little tired, sweetheart," I lied, forcing a smile. "It's been a long day." Later, as the wedding cake was being cut, Madison leaned in and whispered, "Such a quaint cake, Julian, and I prefer something a little more modern." Her words stung, particularly because I knew how much time and effort had gone into creating this cake, a replica of the one from my own wedding. I'd hoped it would be a symbol of continuity, a link between generations. But Madison, as always, found a way to twist it into a slight. "It's traditional, dear," I replied, my voice tight. "A family recipe." As the evening drew to a close and guests began to depart, Madison approached me, a smug smile playing on her lips. "Well, Hazel," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, "it's been interesting. I'm sure you'll be relieved to have your quiet life back." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Quiet life. This wasn't just my home. It was my legacy, a testament to years of hard work and dedication. And she, with her thinly veiled insults and constant criticisms, was trying to erase it, to make me feel small and insignificant. "I'm sure I will, dear," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. "And I'm also sure you and Julian will enjoy your new life." My words held a double meaning. a subtle hint of the storm brewing beneath the surface of my forced composure. I wouldn't let her win. I wouldn't let her diminish me. I had plans, and Madison Walsh, with her condescending smile and her icy fiancé, was about to learn that underestimating Hazel Griffin was a grave mistake. The flicker of confusion in her eyes as I turned away was the first taste of the sweet revenge to come. The mansion, my mansion, stood silent witness to the promise I made to myself that night. It held secrets, and soon Madison would discover them too. Rain lashed against the windows of my Millbrook home, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. Madison, perched on the edge of my antique sofa, delicately held a teacup as if it might bite her. "Such quaint decor, Hazel," she said, her voice dripping with a sweetness that felt like poison. "It's charmingly vintage." I forced a smile, the familiar sting of her backhanded compliments tightening my chest. "Thank you, dear. This house has been in my family for generations." She gave a little, dismissive laugh. "Oh, I can see that. It certainly has that lived-in feel." The air thickened with unspoken judgment. Every nick in the antique furniture, every faded photograph on the mantelpiece, suddenly felt like a mark of shame under her scrutinizing gaze. "I suppose it's a bit different from Julian's penthouse apartment," I offered, trying to keep my voice even. Madison's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, vastly different. Julian is accustomed to a certain standard of living. Minimalist, you see. Clean lines, not so much clutter." Her gaze swept across the room, lingering on the family portraits and hand-stitched cushions. It must be quite an adjustment for him. I stirred my tea, the clinking spoon the only sound in the suddenly oppressive silence. "He seems to be settling in well," I managed, though my heart ached with a familiar pang. Since their wedding, Madison's presence had slowly transformed my home, my sanctuary, into a battleground of subtle insults and veiled criticisms. "Well, as long as he's happy," Madison replied with a shrug. "That's all that matters, isn't it?" The rain continued to drum against the glass, the rhythmic tapping a counterpoint to the unsettling rhythm of Madison's subtle digs. She set down her teacup, a delicate clink on the antique table, and rose gracefully. "I should be going," she announced, smoothing down the impeccable lines of her designer dress. "Julian will be wondering where I am." A wave of exhaustion washed over me. The effort of constantly adapting, of trying to meet her unspoken expectations, was draining me. "Of course, dear," I said, forcing another smile. "Give him my love." She offered a perfunctory air kiss and glided towards the door, her heels clicking on the polished wood floors. "Oh, and Hazel." She paused at the threshold, turning back with a carefully crafted expression of concern. "Perhaps you might consider updating some of the furniture for when Julian's family visits. Just a thought." I watched her go, the closing door echoing in the sudden quiet. The storm outside raged on, but within the walls of my home, a different kind of tempest was gathering strength. Her words, though veiled in polite concern, cut deeper than any outright insult. They were a dismissal, a rejection not just of my home, but of me, of my life, of everything I held dear. I stood alone in the gathering dusk, the remnants of the afternoon tea a stark reminder of the invisible wall that had grown between us. The portraits of my family, generations of Griffins, who had lived and loved within these walls, seemed to stare back at me, their silent presence a source of unexpected strength. Madison wanted minimalist, clean lines. She wanted to erase the traces of my family, of my history. She wanted me to become invisible within my own home. A slow, steady resolve began to take root within me. I looked around at the familiar objects, the antique furniture, the faded photographs, each one a testament to a life lived, a family loved. These were not marks of shame. They were my legacy, and I wouldn't let anyone, not even my son's wife, erase them. A flicker of something cold and sharp, something I hadn't felt in years, began to ignite within me. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was something more calculated, more strategic. The storm outside was beginning to subside, the clouds parting to reveal a sliver of the setting sun, and as the light streamed in through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, I knew what I had to do. I had a lifetime of memories within these walls, and I wouldn't let them be swept away so easily. Madison wanted a clean slate. Perhaps she should be careful what she wished for, because I was about to show her just how clean things could get. The faintest hint of a smile touched my lips. The game, my dear Madison, had just begun. I walked to the window, watching the last of the rain clouds drift away. Somewhere, beyond the storm, a new dawn was breaking, and it was going to be a beautiful day. The antique clock in the hall chimed 4 times, a mocking reminder of the hours I'd spent trying to make Madison feel welcome in my home. Honestly, Hazel, these doilies just scream grandma, she'd said earlier, wrinkling her nose at the hand-crocheted pieces my own mother had taught me to make. I'd quickly tucked them away, trying to smooth things over. I just thought they added a touch of hominess. I'd offered weakly, but Madison just rolled her eyes and continued her relentless critique of my decor. You know, Julian and I are thinking minimalist for our new place. Clean lines, you know, not so cluttered. Her pointed glance at the family photos lining the mantelpiece stung more than any direct insult could have. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Of course, dear, whatever makes you happy. The next day, determined to bridge the widening chasm between us, I baked a batch of Madison's favorite lemon bars. I remember you mentioning how much you enjoyed these at the wedding, Madison, I said, placing the warm plate on the coffee table. She picked one up, examined it with a detached air, then took a small bite. They're fine, she said, her tone suggesting they were anything but. A little too sweet, though. Julian prefers things less sugary. She placed the half-eaten bar back on the plate, a clear dismissal of my effort. Perhaps next time I'll try a sugar substitute, I replied, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. Or perhaps, Madison interjected, flipping through a magazine, next time we could just skip the baking altogether. I'm trying to watch my figure, you know, for the wedding photos. It was a constant barrage of subtle jabs, each one chipping away at my confidence and sense of belonging. I rearranged the furniture to her liking, replaced my floral curtains with plain linen ones, even started drinking the bitter green tea she favored, all in the hope of earning a sliver of her approval. But nothing seemed to work. "This is earthy," she commented one afternoon, barely concealing her distaste. "Julian prefers a more delicate blend. He says this stuff tastes like dirt." I managed a weak smile. I'll make a note of that. That night, I sat alone in my sunroom, the scent of jasmine from the neglected garden wafting in through the open window. I stared at the framed photo of my late husband, Richard, a wave of grief and loneliness washing over me. He wouldn't recognize this house, this version of me, constantly tiptoeing around someone else's whims. I closed my eyes, remembering Richard's hearty laugh, the way he always made me feel cherished and valued. A new resolve began to solidify within me. It was time to stop shrinking myself to fit into Madison's world. It was time to reclaim my own space, my own life. It was time for a change. A flicker of an idea, a small seed of defiance, began to take root in my mind. Madison, with her obsession with appearances and her constant comparisons to Julian, had unwittingly given me a weapon. She'd mentioned wanting to find a new apartment closer to Julian's office in the city. It's just so much more convenient. You know, she'd said, implying that my quiet suburban home was somehow a burden. And the buildings downtown are so much more modern. I knew of a building downtown, a brand new luxury high-rise with stunning penthouses overlooking the city. I also knew, through a friend on the buildings board, that one of the penthouses was still available, a penthouse far beyond Madison and Julian's current means. A slow smile spread across my face as the pieces of my plan began to fall into place. I picked up my phone and dialed my friend's number. "Martha," I said, my voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "I need a favor." The conversation was brief, efficient. Martha assured me she could arrange a private viewing of the penthouse for Madison and Julian. "Consider it done," she said, her voice laced with amusement. I thanked her and hung up, the smile widening. The bait was set. The next day, I casually mentioned the penthouse to Madison. "I heard about this amazing new building downtown," I said, feigning nonchalance. "Apparently, they have a penthouse available with breathtaking views." Madison's eyes lit up. "Oh, really? Maybe Julian and I should take a look. I can arrange a private viewing if you'd like," I offered, trying to sound as helpful as possible. "A friend of mine is on the board." Madison practically squealed with delight. "Oh, Hazel, that would be wonderful." The viewing was scheduled for the following week. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I spent the intervening days perfecting my plan, ensuring every detail was in place. The thought of Madison's inevitable disappointment, the realization that the opulent lifestyle she craved was beyond her reach, filled me with a quiet sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about reclaiming my power, about reminding myself and Madison that I was not invisible, I was not irrelevant, and I was certainly not someone to be underestimated. The game, my dear Madison, had just begun. October in Brooklyn held a certain crispness in the air, a chill that mirrored the one I still felt whenever Madison Walsh's name crossed my mind. I was recovering from a nasty cold, the kind that leaves you weak and shaky, but an idea had taken root, stronger than any lingering cough. I'd spent the morning meticulously peeling and slicing Granny Smith apples, the scent of cinnamon and sugar filling my small kitchen. "This pie," I murmured to myself, carefully crimping the edges of the crust. "This pie is going to be special." It wasn't just the extra touch of nutmeg, or the way I'd painstakingly woven the lattice top. This pie held a secret, a quiet defiance simmering beneath its golden surface. Madison had, on more than one occasion, implied that my cooking was rustic, charmingly old-fashioned, she'd called it, her eyes flitting to the sleek, stainless steel appliances in her and Michael's apartment. Of course, Julian and I prefer more modern cuisine. She'd said it with a smile, but the barb was there, sharp and pointed. My son, Michael, bless his heart, always tried to smooth things over. Mom's apple pie is the best, Maddie, he'd say, but she'd just raise a perfectly sculpted eyebrow and change the subject. So here I was, pie in hand, standing outside their apartment door in Brooklyn. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I knew Madison wouldn't be expecting me. She'd made that quite clear. Weekends are for Julian and mean Mother Griffin, she'd said, her voice laced with a saccharine sweetness that never reached her eyes. Weekdays are for, well, for whatever it is you do. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The door swung open, and there she was, Madison, in a silk robe and slippers, her hair wrapped in a towel. Surprise flickered across her face, quickly replaced by a carefully crafted mask of polite displeasure. Mother Griffin, she said, her voice flat. To what do we owe the pleasure? Just thought I'd drop by with a little something, I said, holding up the pie. I made your favorite apple. I knew it wasn't her favorite. She'd told me once, with a delicate shudder, that she found apple pie soaptustrian. Oh, she said, her smile strained. How thoughtful. Michael isn't here, you know. It was a dismissal, clear as day. I know, dear, I replied, my voice unwavering. This is for you. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. Well, come in then, she said, stepping aside. Don't just stand there in the hallway. Her tone suggested I was an unwelcome stray she was begrudgingly letting in from the rain. The apartment was immaculate, as always. Everything was perfectly placed, perfectly polished, perfectly impersonal. It felt more like a showroom than a home. I placed the pie on the pristine white countertop. I hope you enjoy it, I said, my hand lingering on the warm crust. I'm sure I will, Madison replied, her gaze already drifting away. She was clearly eager to get me out of there. I have a rather important voting regimen need to attend to. Of course, dear, I said, turning towards the door. You wouldn't want to interrupt that. As I walked out of the building and onto the bustling Brooklyn street, a small smile played on my lips. The chill in the air didn't seem so biting anymore. I hailed a cab, settled into the back seat, and looked out the window at the passing cityscape. The first phase was complete. The pie, you see, wasn't just any apple pie. It was a sugar-free apple pie, made with a special sweetener Madison had specifically mentioned she used for her strict dietary requirements. She'd gone on and on about how refined sugar was utterly barbaric, and how this particular sweetener was the secret to her flawless complexion and enviable energy levels. She'd also mentioned, rather emphatically, that it caused a digestive distress if consumed in large quantities. I hadn't told her, of course, that the sweetener in question reacted rather violently a certain brand of digestive enzyme supplement she'd also mentioned taking religiously, a brand I'd just so happened to sprinkle liberally into the apple filling. The next few days, I made sure to call Michael frequently, feigning concern for his well-being. "How's Madison, dear?" I'd ask casually. "Is she feeling all right?" Michael's responses grew increasingly frantic. "She's been unwell, Mom," he said, his voice tight with worry. "Terrible stomach cramps. She's barely left the bathroom." I clucked sympathetically, my heart filled with a peculiar mix of guilt and satisfaction. "Oh dear," I'd say, "poor Madison. Maybe she should see a doctor." I knew Madison wouldn't see a doctor. She was far too vain to admit to any digestive irregularities. She'd chalk it up to a bad oyster or a dodgy salad dressing. Anything but the innocent-looking apple pie she'd so readily dismissed. And as I pictured her, pale and miserable, confined to the pristine white bathroom of her perfect apartment, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. It wasn't just about the insults, the subtle digs, the constant feeling of being less than. It was about something more profound, something that resonated deep within me. It was about reclaiming my space, my worth, my dignity. And this, I realized, was only the beginning. I had a feeling this little episode might loosen Madison's grip on my son just enough to give me the leverage I needed for the next phase of my plan. A plan that involved a certain penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park and a holiday season Madison Walsh would never forget. The Brooklyn air hung thick and humid as I let myself into Madison and Michael's apartment. Just popping in to water the plants. "Dear," I'd told Madison earlier, my voice as bright and breezy as I could manage. "Don't want them to wilt while you're at the spa with Julian." She'd barely glanced up from her phone, just muttered a distracted okay. That dismissiveness, that casual disregard for my presence, had become the norm. My key slid into the lock smoothly, a small, silent victory. Inside, the apartment was cool and dim, the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. I walked straight to the kitchen, ostensibly to check on the basil plant perched on the windowsill. "Doing splendidly," I murmured to the fragrant leaves, my gaze drifting to the gleaming stainless steel refrigerator. This was where my plan hinged. Madison, bless her meticulous heart, had a habit of labeling everything. Every container, every jar, every meticulously portioned meal prep box bore a neat, handwritten sticker. I opened the refrigerator, a small smile playing on my lips. There they were, lined up like soldiers on parade. Julian's protein shake, Monday; Julian's green smoothie, Tuesday; Julian's kale and quinoa salad, Wednesday. It was almost comical, the way everything revolved round Julian. Michael, my own son, seemed relegated to the leftovers. "I wonder where Michael's meals are," I mused aloud, though I knew the answer. He ate whatever Madison deemed fit for him, usually a smaller portion of whatever she prepared for Julian. I carefully removed the containers destined for Julian's consumption this week. One by one, I replaced their contents, not with anything harmful, of course, just a few adjustments. A pinch of this, a dash of that. Ingredients that, when combined, would create a rather interesting effect. Let's just say Julian's digestive system was about to have a week it wouldn't soon forget. I hummed a little tune as I worked, the familiar melody a soothing balm against the sting of Madison's constant slights. I replaced the containers, ensuring the labels remained perfectly aligned. From the outside, everything looked precisely as it had before. No evidence of my visit, no trace of my handiwork. All done, I whispered, a sense of quiet satisfaction washing over me. Next, I moved to the pantry. Here, amidst the rows of organic grains and imported spices, lay another key element of my plan. Madison was obsessed with her morning matcha latte. She claimed it gave her a vibrant glow and boosted her energy. I, however, knew it was simply another way to flaunt her supposed superiority. "Oh, this matcha is simply divine," she declared one morning, her voice dripping with condescension as she eyed my humble cup of black coffee. "It's so much more refined." I reached for the canister of vibrant green powder. Inside, I added a generous amount of spirulina, another green powder, but one with a distinctly earthy flavor. It wouldn't be harmful, just unpleasant, enough to disrupt Madison's carefully curated morning ritual. I closed the canister, a mischievous glint in my eyes. "Let's see how vibrant your glow is after a week of this, dear," I murmured, picturing Madison's disgusted expression as she took her first sip. With my work in the kitchen complete, I moved on to the living room. Madison had recently redecorated, filling the space with expensive, minimalist furniture. It was all stark white and beige, devoid of any warmth or personality. "It's so chic," she gushed, clearly expecting me to be impressed. I, however, preferred my cozy, lived-in home, filled with family photos and mismatched furniture. I paused in front of a large, abstract painting that hung above the fireplace. It was a chaotic swirl of colors, supposedly representing the dynamism of the modern world. I, however, saw only a mess, each a meme. I mused, stepping closer. I reached into my bag and retrieved a small tube of super glue. Carefully, I applied a thin line of glue along the bottom edge of the frame. Then I stepped back and waited. A few minutes later, I heard the familiar click of the key in the lock. Madison and Julian were back. "Darling, I'm home," Madison called out, her voice echoing through the apartment. I quickly retreated to the kitchen, pretending to be engrossed in watering the basil. "Hello, Mother Griffin," Julian said, his tone polite but distant. He always seemed uncomfortable around me, perhaps sensing my disapproval of his hold over Madison. "Just tending to the plants, dear," I replied, my voice sweet and innocent. Madison swept into the kitchen, her eyes scanning the room. "Everything looks fine," she said dismissively. Then her gaze landed on the painting above the fireplace. "Oh," for she began, her voice trailing off as she noticed something amiss. The painting, now slightly askew, was slowly but surely sliding down the wall. The superglue, having done its job, was holding the frame firmly in place, while the canvas itself peeled away, creating a comical, distorted image. "What on earth?" Madison exclaimed, rushing towards the fireplace. I suppressed a smile. My work here was done. "Oh dear," I said, feigning concern. "It seems the humidity has affected the adhesive. Such a shame." I picked up my bag and headed for the door. "Must be going now," I said brightly. "Dinner to prepare." As I stepped out into the hallway, I could hear Madison's frustrated cries echoing behind me. The first domino had fallen, and I had a feeling the rest of the week was going to be very interesting. Christmas Eve. The scent of pine needles and cinnamon hung in the air a stark contrast to the chill that had settled between Madison Walsh and me. "It's just quaint, Mother Griffin," she'd said earlier, her nose wrinkled as she surveyed my modest, twinkling Christmas tree. "Julian and I are used to something a bit grander." Her words, though couched in politeness, stung. It was a sentiment she'd expressed about almost everything I owned, everything I did. Since her whirlwind courtship with my son Michael, I simply smiled, a tight, practiced smile that hid the hurt. "Well, dear," I'd replied, "Christmas isn't about grandeur, is it? It's about family." Little did she know just how much family meant to me, and how far I would go to protect what was left of mine. The past few months had been a blur of subtle digs and barely veiled criticisms from Madison. "This old furniture really dates the place, don't you think, Michael?" she'd mused one afternoon, idly running her fingers over the antique sideboard my late husband had cherished. "Maybe we could help you update it, Mother Griffin." Her help, of course, meant replacing everything I held dear with sleek, modern pieces that felt cold and impersonal. It meant erasing the memories that clung to the worn fabric and polished wood. She'd even attempted to dictate where Michael and I sat during family dinners, relegating me to a smaller chair in the corner, while she and Julian presided over the table like royalty. "The light's better here for conversation, don't you think?" she'd chirped, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. I'd endured it all, swallowing my pride and reminding myself that Michael was happy. His happiness, after losing his father, had become my sole focus. But even happiness has a limit, and Madison was pushing mine. I'd spent my life building a warm, loving home, a sanctuary for my family. Now it felt like an intruder had moved in, rearranging the furniture, rearranging my life, and making it clear I no longer belonged. The events of the past few weeks played in my mind, a carefully orchestrated ballet of quiet revenge. The seemingly innocent conversations, the casual mentions of Julian's love for penthouse views, the shared laughter with Madison over her dreams of a lavish ski chalet for Christmas. It had all been part of the plan, a plan to reclaim my sense of worth, to remind Madison that respect is earned, not demanded. And tonight, Christmas Eve, was the culmination of that plan. "I have a surprise for you both," I announced, my voice steady as I addressed Michael and Madison, who were now nestled on the sofa. A mug of hot chocolate warming Madison's perfectly manicured hands. "Something I've been meaning to tell you for a while." I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, velvet box. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, lay a key. Madison's eyes widened. "What's this, Mother Griffin?" "It's the key to your new apartment, dear," I said, my smile finally genuine. "A penthouse, actually, overlooking the city, just like Julian wanted." Madison gasped, her eyes flitting to Julian, who looked equally stunned. "Butho," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been saving for years," I explained, hoping to give Michael and his future wife a good start. And when Julian mentioned how much he loved penthouse views, I let my voice trail off, allowing them to fill in the blanks. "This is incredible, Mom," Michael exclaimed, hugging me tightly. He'd been oblivious to the tension between Madison and me, his focus solely on his wife's happiness, and seeing his genuine joy, I knew I'd done the right thing for him. Madison, however, remained silent, her face a mixture of confusion and was that resentment. "It's beautiful, Mother Griffin," she finally managed, her voice tight. "Thank you. You're welcome, dear," I replied, my voice soft. "Merry Christmas." What Madison and Julian didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend in their excitement, was that the penthouse wasn't just any penthouse. It was directly above mine, and with the soundproofing in my newly renovated apartment, now decorated precisely to my taste, I wouldn't hear a peep from their grand Christmas celebrations, or any other celebrations, for that matter. I'd reclaimed my home, my peace, and perhaps, just perhaps, a little bit more. I glanced at a framed photo of my late husband on the mantelpiece, a quiet smile playing on my lips. "Merry Christmas, darling," I whispered. I think I finally got the last laugh. And as the sound of carolers drifted from the street below, I raised my glass of wine, a toast to peace, quiet, and the sweet taste of revenge. The Manhattan skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new penthouse, a panorama of twinkling lights reflecting in the polished granite of my kitchen island. "Another glass of champagne, Hazel?" Julian asked, his voice surprisingly warm. "Of course, dear," I replied, handing him my glass. It was Christmas Eve, a year since my son Michael's wedding, a year since Madison had sneered, "Mom, really, that dress? It's a little much for a simple family gathering, don't you think?" She'd suggested I change, implying my outfit was somehow inappropriate for my own son's wedding reception. I remember feeling a sting of humiliation, a sense of being erased. But tonight, things were different. "This view is breathtaking," Madison commented, her eyes sweeping over the cityscape. "You must be so proud." "Hazel, pride? Yes, I suppose I was." But the satisfaction ran deeper than simple pride. It was a vindication. "It is lovely," I agreed, accepting the refilled champagne flute from Julian. "It's the culmination of a lot of hard work." Madison took a sip of her champagne, a thoughtful expression on her face. "You never mentioned working on anything like this, Hazel. Were you keeping secrets?" Her tone held a note of suspicion, perhaps a touch of envy. "Oh, I had a few projects brewing," I said vaguely, gesturing toward the sprawling apartment. "Things I wanted to focus on, personal endeavors." Michael joined us, his arm around Madison's waist. "Mom, this place is amazing. When did all this happen?" He sounded genuinely surprised, and I couldn't help but smile. He knew nothing of my projects. He'd been so caught up in smoothing things over between his wife and me, so oblivious to the subtle war being waged. "It's a long story, darling," I said, patting his hand. "A story for another time." The evening unfolded beautifully. The catered dinner was impeccable. The Christmas tree shimmered with elegant ornaments, and the atmosphere was filled with a warmth that had been conspicuously absent the previous Christmas. Madison was unusually attentive, showering me with compliments and questions about my work. Julian, too, seemed genuinely impressed, which I found quietly amusing. Later, as Michael and Julian were discussing some business venture on the balcony, Madison pulled me aside. "Hazel," she began, her voice low to need to apologize for how I've treated you in the past. "I was insensitive, jealous, even." She looked down at her hands, her perfectly manicured nails gleaming under the soft light. You seem to have achieved so much, and to feel small. I studied her for a moment, her carefully constructed facade finally crumbling. Madison, I said gently, success isn't about making others feel small. It's about realizing your own potential. I took a sip of my champagne, letting her words sink in. You have so much potential, dear. Don't waste it on petty jealousies. She looked up at me, her eyes glistening. I don't even know what I want to do with my life. Julian has his business, and I just drift. The vulnerability in her voice surprised me. Was this the real Madison? The one hidden beneath layers of designer clothes and calculated snubs? Perhaps, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. We could talk about that. I have some experience in navigating unexpected opportunities. The evening continued with a newfound sense of ease. The tension that had hung in the air for the past year seemed to dissipate, replaced by a fragile hope. As they prepared to leave, Madison hugged me, a genuine embrace. Thank you for tonight, Hazel. It was magical. Merry Christmas, Madison, I said, returning her hug. And Julian? I watched them step into the elevator, a sense of quiet triumph washing over me. They had no idea how much this magical evening was orchestrated, how much of my success was directly tied to Madison's own insecurities. They didn't know about the anonymous tip I'd given to the authorities about Julian's questionable business practices, or the fact that this very penthouse, this symbol of my newfound wealth, was purchased with the money I'd received from selling the apartment building where Madison and Michael lived. An apartment building I'd owned all along, a secret I'd kept close to my chest, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal my hand. They were celebrating Christmas in my penthouse, blissfully unaware that their world, as they knew it, was about to change drastically. The eviction notice would arrive in the new year, and as the elevator doors closed, I raised my glass in a silent toast. The sweetest revenge, indeed, is served cold, and sometimes it comes with a spectacular view.